So my presentation today is very much going to introduce our technology, the Biofield viewer, but very much in the context of, what we know about the human being. I come to you wearing several different hats. I work with the United Nations with an NGO. I'm the official representative to them. I also work for the Foundation of Alternative and Integrative Medicine, which was formed by American Senator Berkeley Bedell and Senator Harkin, and we basically provide important information when required. This organization on the bottom left is the Center for Biofield Sciences, and I'm going to be speaking about work from there today. Energy Medicine Exchange is a group on Facebook. We have about 32,000 members. Please join up if you're interested in this kind of work. This is where I work. Kimberly Shipkey, my partner, and I spend several months every year designing clinical studies, and the main focus is on measuring subtle energy, examining tools that purport to protect us from EMFs. We see ourselves as kind of energy cops. People make claims that they're doing wonderful things for our energy. We want to make sure at least they're not harming us, and potentially they're doing what you're paying, otherwise might be $60 for a little piece of plastic. So there's a certain, our field is also the Wild West, and I'm Wyatt Earp. Where do we get all this from? Where do we get all this stuff from? I was at a UN meeting, actually, on sustainability a few years ago. It was a very hot, sunny day like today, and I do get distracted. I was in the museum pretty quickly, and I was surprised how many images that you see have got auras, halos. What is I worked out that at least half of the art in the Metropolitan Museum in New York displayed an auric field in some way, whether it was in stone or bronze or, on paper. There's a clear communication from our ancient artists that there are these maps. And, what does a map mean? It means that we can potentially find our way around. But they didn't just give us maps. They also gave us legend to decipher the maps. So, for example, when you see an image of a rishi or a yogi with their chakras, you always see that the chakras have a certain number of petals. Now, this relates to frequency. They did not have oscilloscopes in the caves in the Himalayas, but what they did have, this clear sight. So they were able to observe that the lower chakras were responsible for the slower wavelengths of the spectrum, and that the higher chakras were responsible for communicating and engaging the higher ranges within the spectrum. And they clearly denoted this with the chakra petals. So what we're really talking about is the human atmosphere. And perhaps what we are doing is we are weather forecasters. We're taking the individual and working out what these patterns in their field mean. Now, your equipment is an interface which short-circuits some of that. The program has already got the needle in the haystack algorithms in there. But when we're working, in any holistic modality, what are the common threads, and what is it that we must share? I was trained in a tradition in India when I first was at university, and they clearly defined these gradations of layers of the human biofield. Even very powerful words, Tainu-Gatha, Asda. Asda is an interesting word, because if you look at your hair on your arm, okay, you'll notice that it all has a very certain pattern. Obviously, some of you don't have hair, I appreciate that. But where you do have hair on your body, even if you need to borrow somebody else's, you'll see that the hair seems to be shaped a bit like the reeds in a river. There are kind of currents. Especially when you look at some, a very hairy man undressed, you can see all these swirls and patterns in their body hair. And that is actually the etheric fluid, the sort of, you were talking about Jing as opposed to Qi and Shen earlier. And I think that's the kind of stuff we're talking about, and it predominates in this body double, which we're going to explore. So obviously these maps have developed somewhat. These are from a great artist called Alex Gray. I'm sure you're familiar with his book. If you don't have his book, I get it, because it's each picture speaks 1,000 words, and it can entertain anyone in your waiting room for as long as they need to wait. But what he clearly does is show these gradations from the physical body into the energetic body seamlessly. Now, modern medicine doesn't allow us to do that. It does with plant biology. You can go into a classroom and learn about the buds and the flowers, the petals, all on the same page. But in human biology, we've had a separation. The glandular system is in modern medicine, in the pharmaceutical world, in modern hospitals, and they have no reference whatsoever to the petals, which we hold dear. So there is an integration required, but of course it has to be with a level playing field. We can't be dictated to. We have to prove all of these different things. And I think that's why our work is interesting, because we're actually showing some of these things that are otherwise being deemed putative or invisible or unseen and therefore unmeasurable, except for a few. So how do we do this? Well, here we can see an orange image from a certain number of different ways. We have the normal photograph of the orange, and then we can see MRI, CT at the top left and right, bottom left and top right, which allow us to peer inside the orange in the same way that MRI and CT allow us to peer inside the body. A question I ask always is, at what price? At what price are we peering into the body? We know from demographics there are 350 million girls missing from the world's demographics. That's more boys have ever died in any war. So where are these 350 million girls? Well, unfortunately, in China we've had a one-child policy. In India we have very expensive dowries now. So we've been using ultrasound for the last two decades as a sort of frontline gendercide. Now again, this is more girls have been removed, not boys, only females. More females have been removed than any boy ever died in any war.
Where's that information from?
It's all over the world. I mean, these cultures have brought this back with them. So if you go to the richest Muslim, Hindu communities in LA, you will find this being practiced, unfortunately. It's becoming more and more illegal. They're confiscating sonograph machines. But the problem is there's a huge price. In the same way, more clearly, obviously, with a CT scan, we're having huge amounts of radiation. Many of us already aren't prepared to go down that route. So I'm definitely going to propose non-invasive techniques for doing the similar processes, which will help get us back onto an even keel, as it were. But I think this bottom right picture needs some word, because it's a Keelian photograph of an orange. And what it tells us is that the orange tree is basically sucking the living daylights out of the sun, okay, and it puts that into balls of light, yeah? And we eat that light, and we urinate and defecate the liquid and solid material, but it's really the light that is our fuel. If it wasn't that way, you would just eat and eat and eat for a month, and then there'd just be a little bucket of ash at the end of the month. But that's not what's happening here. We are sucking the living daylights out of our food in the same way the trees are sucking the living daylights out of the sun, all with good intent, of course. So what is this healing energy, and what is this biofield that I draw your attention to today? Biofield was first coined, the term, in 2002. One of my colleagues, Beverly Rubik, there was I mentioned earlier, FAME. FAME was instrumental in raising $300 million from the American government to establish the Office of Alternative Medicine. This then became the National Center of Complementary and Alternative Medicine. And one of the NCCAM, it's all part of the National Institutes of Health. One of the roles of the NCCM was to have this important meeting, which was, the genie's out the bottle now. We have to address this subject. We can't be in denial about it, so let's put some science on there. Okay, so from one perspective, modern science uses a ruler, and we call it the electromagnetic spectrum. It's been referred to many times today. And in fact, each one of the medical devices that we've come to know hang from this electromagnetic spectrum, and they allow us to peer into areas that our visible spectrum does not allow. In other words, they're like a periscope. So a sonograph is like a periscope. It allows us to see what the machine can hear. X-ray, same way, very high frequency, but it allows us to see through and see what that high frequency machinery is designed to do. In fact, each one of these devices, as I said, hangs off the spectrum. We like devices which are in range of the human field, so they're not dragging the body either lower in frequency or higher in frequency. We see them as being much safer. For example, medical thermal imaging is something that I'm sure all of you have heard about, and perhaps those of you who have seen it as an opportunity to be an alternative to mammography. I would recommend everyone here gets a thermal camera, because these are the kind of things that are actually missing in our community, is safe ways to find out what's going on. And that obviously allows us to practice preventative medicine. So earlier today, I had an opportunity to talk about the kinds of things that we emit. It's very well understood now from research that the body emits biophotons. But you really need to see this in the simple way that it is, that there's an inner flame, as in a candle. And that inner flame remains within the body. We see the gradations of light of a candle. We even see the whole room lit up, ultimately. But we do see those rings around the candle. And those are natural gradations, and we have them too. But what is interesting is that in this technique that we're actually observing biophotons only, tip of that gentleman's finger, that's actually damage from cigarette chemicals and heat on the tip of his finger, and now biophotons are leaking out there. Normally a person would not lose their biophotons. So this is a real important key in sort of more recent discoveries. Now, back to the orange and the apple. What happens when we microwave the biofield of an apple? Here, just 1 minute, we can see how either, Jeffrey was absolutely spot on when he was talking about blessing our food. And, we can repair, we can bring it back to normal. But gee, why do it in the first place? Why not just enhance something already fantastic? So, obviously this slide opens up that whole opportunity of, a human being eats raw, fresh, healthy, vibrant food. A human doing doesn't. Being and consciousness have other qualities of light which you just can't get in McDonald's. And we see that. It's self-selecting in our communities. So, Kirlian photography was really the first new machine 50, 100 years ago, which allowed us to see one of the layers of the energy field. And these guys have gotten really quite advanced. They know how to interpret the missing light beams. It means a great deal, and in the same way that we have maps with the ancient yogis and the acupuncture meridian charts, information we have about reflexology and palm reading, all these things have been handed down for many years. So my machine allows us to see this human energy field live in 3D. So, for example, you can't see what you're seeing very clearly, but it's a hand. And it's a famous picture for me because it's the first ever 3D picture we took. It's of the programmer's hand. But I think you can see sort of red mountains going down the 2 forefingers, which appear a little bit on the little finger and then run down the side there. This is like an aggravated meridian. And of course, allowing us to see it in 3D, we get to see it that much more clearly. So from my perspective, I've been very interested in looking at all these maps, the maps from traditional Oriental medicine. In this case, this is a chart which shows not acupuncture points, as you might think, but actually marma points. They're the same thing. It's not as if there's 2 different stories. There's 2 ways of looking at the same thing. And the more we study these in the UN we call them traditional medicine systems, the more we study them, the more we realize how important modern technology, modern research, and then obviously spreading it more widely, that this is the way to go. Now, our technology is very versatile in the sense that if you're doing a trade show or something, we like people to reveal as much of their body as possible, but you can obviously, as a reflexologist will tell you, you've got a facet of the diamond, so many of them, irregular. The ear will tell you a map of the body. The iridologist will say the eye will tell you everything about the body. The tongue reader will tell you everything about you from your tongue, or the skin, or the face readers. Each skill that is built around these different facets are crucial to bring together. And of course, the technology. This is a new camera from a Japanese research laboratory. I'm a big fan of this American lady, recently passed, called Valerie Hunt. She was based at UCLA, absolutely fantastic woman. Kimberly, my colleague, was taken under her wing and very much sort of appointed as her successor in some ways. And she died at 95, I think, 98. Fabulous woman. This is what she was doing. Very early days of computers, desktop computers. She was, on the right here, measuring the chakras. So she had developed very sensitive sensors in the lab, which she attached to, actually they were ironically wireless sensors, weren't they? They were wireless sensors, and you can see here sort of baseline reading in the top there, all the chakras are humming away, and then when she asked this individual to meditate, all the energy focuses there in the brow chakra. So this is one of the first times that we've had our own kind of chakra machine. She even developed a camera which mysteriously was dismantled, and all the parts have been taken to all corners of the world. I'm not quite sure why that was, but it does allow us to see the kind of aura as like a clairvoyant would. And you can see here that, on the beach, it seems to get very elevated and expanded. And if you kneel in prayer, it actually brightens. And you can even see the connection, the crown connection that we were talking about earlier. That machine, unfortunately, is not available for research, but we do have a number of different devices that are. This funny little white box is that Kirlian photography evolution that I was explaining. Now it doesn't need a darkroom or anything. You just put your fingers in one after the other, and it builds a composite. So you can actually see that on the left-hand side. That's one of the fingertips. What I would say about this team is they've done a huge amount of research, and as you can see, that when it comes to analyzing the images, we have data. That's very important because we can do a study with 100 people using the Quantum Infinity app, and we can monitor them with this device, and we can measure their subtle energy interactions to it. And in fact, that's why I'm already here, is because I've already tested Ryan and Quantum Life's equipment before on a number of different occasions, in a number of different settings over the last 15 years. I really wouldn't be here if I hadn't. I don't want to play with Mickey Mouse. Okay, so I heard someone mention earlier the assemblage point. And this is actually quite an interesting subject, because a lot of people simultaneously seem to have come to the same conclusion, or the same simple realization, that the significant geometry of our biofields is a toroid. Modern physics has rather overlooked the toroid. We have Elizabeth Rauscher and her protege Nassim Haramein to thank for their more recent unified theory, which brings torsion into our modern understanding. But what I mean by torsion is very simple. If I have an atom, say, I'm going to use a coin, it has mass. Yeah, which relates to gravitational fields. Okay? The other thing it'll have is it'll have charge, and that relates to electromagnetic fields. And the third component of an electron is that it will have spin, and that relates to torsion fields. So there are three components. In the same way, a boat can pitch and yaw and backwards and forwards. We have spin, we have charge, and we have mass. Now, spin is very interesting. Quantum physics also will tell us that in this relationship, we have, in fact, I think it was Keith yesterday was talking about blinking. Us blinking in and out of reality. I'd like to reinforce that point and say that what we're doing is wave medicine when we're in a wave state, and then the blinking into particle state is modern allopathic, pharmaceutical-based, drug-based, herb, solid medicines. But in the blinking process, either will work. One in the wave state's very gentle, which is what we all do, and why people don't tend to have side effects when we're working correctly. And the other is much more brutal and involves physically entering into space when things are in a particle state. Now, I mention that now because this assemblage point is not something that the rishis in India ever spoke about. The assemblage point has come out through shamanic experience, actual clairvoyance, and I think Carlos Castaneda was one of the people who first mentioned it in literature, but there is quite a big movement about it. And as you can see from this slide, the nature of the assemblage point, which obviously you can muscle test or dowse to assess its state, what it really is the very, as I said, pitch, yaw, tip, of your toroidal field. So if I'm a top that has been set spinning for 80 years, I want to spin. I don't want to wobble. When you see a top wobbling, you know one thing. It's about to stop. Yeah? So that wobble is disease. And by observing whether the assemblage point is up or down or left or right, we're getting a very clear idea of somebody's pitch or yaw or, convex, concave nature of their field. I only hope that we all kind of integrate this understanding better. Anyway, I must charge on. The chakras are also well understood by Oriental medicine as the dantians. We had a wonderful presentation earlier, and I'm convinced that we are speaking the same language here. Heart Math Institute, if you've not come across them, really are a very good source for the information I've just been speaking about, this toroidal-shaped energy field, which can tip back and tip forward. Now, I've actually removed some slides from this section here, but I do just want to touch a couple of things because I think it explains how your equipment works and how you're now working. And it's so simple, I might as well share it with you. Okay, so one dimension, the first dimension, it's a pen on a piece of paper, it's a dot. in maths at school. It's a 1D dot. And this same dot is right here. It's our base chakra. It doesn't know itself. It just is. It's a dot. The dot only becomes aware of itself when a couple of things have happened. So we take a dot in simple geometry and we draw a line. This is now 2D. 1D becomes 2D. And this line is this line. It's from here to here. Okay? And that's why this chakra is all about relationships. And it's all about the other. Because there's me here and there's you there. You there. You there. You there. You there is the second chakra. The first chakra is responsible for that first bindu point of being. The second chakra is responsible for us being aware of two-dimensional relationships. None of this comes into play, of course, until you actually have 3D. 3D is when I now know what the fuck all I was talking about. I'm back here in the solar plexus, and I know these relationships because I'm back on top of myself. This is what these three chakras we use to navigate 3D. Okay? The heart, which used to beat at 60 beats a second before we all got jobs, the heart is time. It's not related to time. It's not, It is time. The heart chakra is time. Just accept me saying that right now. In other words, the lower three chakras and the fourth chakra help us, this spaceship design, this spacesuit designed to navigate Earth, to navigate the space-time continuum. We do that quite happily, parasympathetically, unknowingly, we navigate 3D space and time. Now, I'm telling you this because recently I've done a lot of research into distant healing. And distant healing, we have a healer in America and clients, Healies, all in our lab in India. And instantly they start sending their healing. We see the response instantly. And there's no current scientific explanation for that. And the reason why that is because we're doing this with our throats and brows and crown chakras. In the same way, all parapsychological techniques of remote viewing, telekinesis, precognition, clairvoyance, they're all operating above the space-time continuum. So that's why we talk about the 7 dimensions of wellness, but of course, they may well be more. There may be higher chakras that, unwritten books, unfilled library shelves in the Akashic records for mankind and womankind to explore. But still, it is important because this relationship with the chakras also connects directly with the elements. So, for example, our base chakra is solid. It's earth. Our navel chakra is responsible for liquid, emotions, a Vedic 5 elements, which are earth, water, fire, air, and akash, or spirit, or ether. So, in modern terms, we talk about ether as being plasma. So there's a huge excitement now. You can look it up, the electric universe, whereby scientists are really beginning to understand that this other state of matter is what we are talking about when we speak about the chakras and subtle energy. This work is all being done right now, but an indication is this is a plasma focus gun, and this is a clairvoyance drawing of the throat chakra. So we really are talking about the same kind of thing. Torsion fields. The direction of the spin of the chakras. there's a huge amount of concurrence in so many different systems. This is pranic healing. We all talk about the same major chakras, and they're quite happy to all of the different organizations, the different institutes working this field, to explain that there are levels of almost initiation as you learn more about the different aspects of the field. Barbara Ann Brennan had a great artist draw these wonderful gyroscopic chakras and giving us a really clear idea of what clairvoyance can see. But it's not just the Vedic system that I want to speak about today. I also want to address the meridians and Oriental journeying into the subtle energy and the physical structures that relate to it. So let me just show you this very simple experiment, because it's really blown everything out of the water. Here on the left, on the top panel, you can see brain scans using a functional MRI. These are all done in UCLA or University of California. And the yellow slide A shows that when I shine a light into the eye, the visual cortex is illuminated during the fMRI process. In the same way, the experiment states that, okay, there's a vision point, the vision is in the eye, but there's also a vision point on the bladder meridian. So the research proposal was, if we stimulate the vision point on the toe, will the functional MRI illuminate in the same way as shining a light did? And of course, that's exactly what does happen. So this is reinforcing, using very modern technologies, what the ancients and what traditional medicine has been saying. But look at this. This is fascinating. When I shine a light into the eye, it reaches the brain and the response happens in about a quarter of a second. But when I stimulate the vision point on the toe, it happens exponentially faster. In other words, what we've got is even though the optic nerve is very much like a fiber optic, the nervous system in the body is like our old-fashioned kind of cables and the electric cables with the switches in our body, and the meridian system is like a fiber optic superhighway. That's what we must deduce from this research. Okay. Just a quick aside, this is a Russian machine, AccuVision 4, which actually shows up the acupuncture points. So it's not like we're talking about invisible, unseen things. But much, much more exciting is recent progress done by a global team of scientists who we've actually been physically identifying the meridians. So if I had taken a poll earlier and said, who thinks the meridians are energy channels, half of us probably would have put our hands up. And if I'd said, and who thinks that they're physical, the other half would have gone up. But clearly, from recent research, they are physical, and they have, and they've been overlooked because they're tiny. They're absolutely tiny, and let me show you what I mean. There's a lot of writing on there, but it's about 2009. Ko, who is a well-known scientist in South Korea, renamed the system from Bonghan duct. Bonghan was a North Korean scientist, and they had become known as the Bonghan ducts, but global scientists felt they were called the meridians before. Let's give them a name that doesn't have to be somebody's name, and so they call them the premovascular system. Now, this is very important for you, because you're now going to know to look out for research on the premovascular system as it comes up, and hopefully we'll be seeing more and more endorsement for the kind of therapies that we do. That's the point. So let me show you what these little channels look like. They're very tiny threads, very tiny. They need to be stained, and this is one inside a capillary here. And you can actually, we've had to show you in a drawing because it's so tiny between the two blue arrows here, and that's inside a capillary, which is actually what you think might be the smallest vessel. But it's so tiny. And they really are like fiber optic. A bit of a gruesome slide here, but when you actually isolate them, they're like fiber optic strands. And we have been staining them and discovering that they are, that's why we call it the premovascular system, because it predates the vascular system. We can see these threads. It's a spider's web. It's a web of tiny filaments, as has been suggested, down which a sort of charged fluid travels. So I guess Tai Chi and Qigong masters, their fluid's got a lot more mojo in it than the rest of us. But that's perhaps one of the great aims. Again, this time lag of perhaps 30 years of modern science, they don't let acupuncturists into the university electron microscope labs. They just don't let us in there. But in North Korea, where they don't have that separation, this type of research was able to be done. And this is one of the most recent slides, nanobiotechnology, where we're learning that the spread of cancer is using this network of tiny filaments, meridians, channels. Okay, so is the biofield measurable? My God, it is. And we've got so many maps, haven't we? People know all kinds of wonderful things about the energy field. What I'm particularly interested in is all the different modalities that have advanced training, that develop really very specific and share very specific knowledge gleaned over years and years and years, and then comparing them. So, for example, this chart here is from a community of tuning fork practitioners. And so they uphold here. I'm really sorry you can't read them all now, but you will have all this in front of you soon, which I hope is more important, that grief and sadness is located somewhere and stored somewhere in the energy field. It sits on the lungs. Now, a lot of different modalities teach this. So what we need to do, obviously, and what we are doing, is integrating our technology with all these different understandings so we can learn more about these patterns, these atmospherics. Okay, there are so many of them, and you're going to get them all, so that's the important thing, I think. But what does our biofield imaging system look like? As you can see, this gentleman is made up of a composite. He's not lost his hands. I've just put him together so that you can see what we're doing. We basically use a light, a full spectrum light, to standardize the environment. And what we're able to do is, with our various different filters, this one is known as Biofield Viewer, and this one is known as Chakra Viewer, we're able to see how the biofield interacts with our light source. So, for example, when I see patterns like this on somebody, the first question I'm going to ask them is about grief, not smoking. Yeah? Because we're going much deeper than symptoms hang on, smoking is a big issue, it's an environmental issue, but we're not talking about disease states, we're talking about emotional states, because they're the roots of the diseases and they're what we're seeing. For many, many, many years, I did a study at the university, we called it the Atlas of Disease States. We scanned thousands of people with all different diseases, and they all had similar patterns, but you can't pigeonhole people. Each individual is totally individual. We have to learn the system and then read their individual weather. And the methods that we use to help them find balance are infinite. But it is important because, we're now showing the chakras to be real. For example, when I take a picture of someone in this chakra viewer mode, we really lose them. You're losing their face, their ears, the quality of them. We're really just focusing on their chakras. And we can see what's happening very interestingly here. And this is just an example, is that you can see his heart chakra has shrunken and darkened. And what's happening is his solar plexus, which is the chakra underneath, is going, gee, that one up there's got blocked. So it's opened to try and stimulate the chakra above it. This is what's all subconsciously happening. And unfortunately, it's not worked. So I've captured this all at the moment when even that chakra is getting disturbed. And that is the descent into disease, because our chakras are doing all kinds of going off and on all the time. It's only when they get blocked and disturbed, and then the fail-safe repair systems, they also get affected, we start showing symptoms. In other words, we can prepone diagnosis. From when people have symptoms and they visit a doctor, we can bring it way back. We're not ambulance chasing. We've got a year, we've got a golden year where we can scan somebody and go, gee, wow, let's try this, and, balance and harmonize them in the different ways that are appropriate. Our system is live, it's real time. So when you're working with it in practice, it means that you and your healee can both see what's going on. But on a straight assessment process, we have a very standard conversation, and obviously I'm training doctors and therapists all over the world right now how to interpret these images. And I say to everybody, once you've taken 100 pictures, you master it. Once you've seen 100 people, spoken to them, you know their medical records, then you get what this thing is doing. But clearly, say for example, if I interpret this lady, she's got a lot of pooling in her navel region, more on the left side. I say, what medication are you taking? She's on meds for irritable bowel syndrome. I say, that's not the problem. Your problem is with your daughter. You're estranged from her, and you need to call her up. That's your prescription. Because that's exactly what happened. Sure enough, 2 years ago, my daughter and I had a big argument. We haven't spoken for 2 years. My symptoms started 2 years ago. And I were like, well, in 2 years by now, I'm sure you both want to speak to each other. So just get on the phone. And it's simple things like that. If they're not addressed on this level, they'll be on irritable bowel meds for the rest of their life, if that's the way they're going to go. So why not deal with it all on this level? And that's what I firmly believe and understand you guys are all doing already.
Thornton, have you looked at German new medicine and the correlation of that? Because that's very similar, right, in terms of what happens in the brain as a result of emotional trauma.
Yeah, well, I mean, we are very lucky in our institute in the sense we've been doing this for nearly 25 years, and we've had a number of collaborations. I think we're all separate in different silos as a sort of protection mechanism. If we all lined up the ducks, I'm sure the pharmaceutical secret police would knock us all out. I think there is a healthy, organic separation going on. But yeah, I've tested a lot of devices, Vol, EAV devices. We use a simple camera and light. We set up a very standard environment, but amazing things happen. For example, this gentleman has had his arm removed. It's not the clearest picture, except this is the stump of his arm. Just to get your bearings, this is his left nipple. So we're really close up on the top half of his torso, but what you can see is the nipple and the stump of his arm, and then this is a phantom limb. So in the same way in science we talk about the phantom leaf effect, Keith was going on about holography and holograms earlier. This is very much the same sort of principle. If you take the leaf and you cut a slice of the top of the leaf, as you can see here, for a few seconds we still see that subtle body life force of the leaf. And that's very important because it means a lot to subtle energy research. This is a healthy looking fellow. This is what we like to see, nice symmetry in the biofield. The organs in the body aren't symmetrical, but the biofield is symmetrical. We can see a few dental issues. There's a bit of a disparity between his right arm and his left arm. So I'd be wondering whether that was just a local injury or whether that meant something else. A little bit of congestion over the throat chakra there. So, do you get a chance to express yourself? Are you heard in your marriage? Questions like this. but it's actually a beautiful, beautiful field, that one. This lady, this was in Australia. She, her son was one of our students, and it was sort of Friday. She'd begged him to bring her along on the course. Sad thing was, she was a terminal patient, and she was dead within 16 hours of us taking these pictures. She'd actually been sent back home. Everybody knew what was happening. They all treated her like a ray of light. But what was amazing was that actually, while we had her in front of the Biofield viewer, she started going through this release process of letting go. And it was got a lot to do with what I was rapping with her about. I was like, you're so lucky having a son looking after you. And she was like, what do you mean? I look after him. 'Cause he was an HIV AIDS patient. I said, what are you talking about? He's a therapist. He's on my course. He's looking after you. And you could sort of...
He said thank you to him.
Yeah.
I am really grateful.
Yeah, and it was just like the let go moment. And like I said, she did pass away a few hours after this, but she did let us capture, and she wanted us to. That's why she came along. Yeah, I call this the sort of opening of the portal. But clearly, when we see hundreds of people, we can tell the difference between someone whose health is balanced and, the no rocks on the journey in front of you, and then individuals who perhaps indicate various things. And this is very important in a community, to be able to screen a whole 1,000 people very quickly, and then just work on the ones that need it. But there's so many anomalies. You can see here some. This is a Korean monk, very meditative, and you can see how advanced the brow chakra can get. This guy also, a sort of hairy hippie from India, meditating and creating this white light around his field. More interesting cases where people get possessed by entities, and we can actually see the entities and what they're doing. This is a common sign of people who have some entity, black or very red eyes. The 3D system allows us to see patterns that we wouldn't normally see because we're looking at the whole thing. It's just the etheric layer. I don't know whether you can see these very big kind of craters. There's 2 of them on this particular character. Quite unusual, and we don't really pick up that sort of detail unless we drop their scans into this, and it means we can extrapolate a huge amount of data and really monitor progress. We're proud of this because this is effectively like the Keelian effect, but without the plate, without the charge, just using a video camera, and we're just recreating what a clairvoyance can do. And more recently, instead of just taking pictures and going, there's an improvement there, what we've been able to do is actually analyze images so that we use a system approved by a number of different health authorities around the world. And so we can compare images, not just sort of pattern recognition, but also statistically. And that's why we've had much more research published recently. This is quite a comprehensive paper done with some pranic healers it was a twin hearts meditation, but we did it very thoroughly. And the other thing that's exciting about this study, if you recognize these things, this is brain mapping. Now, QEEG. So in this research, what we were doing is combining biofield mapping along with brain mapping to observe the effects of meditation. And of course, it's right on time because more and more holistic practitioners are being questioned what they're doing is valid, whether it's quackery or whatever. And sometimes these holistic therapies, they don't show up in the normal clinical pharmaceutical studies. So now that we've got templates and ways to study which are accepted, which are going to show them in their true light, it is a very exciting time for us. Denny asked me a very important question: is our system repeatable? In this case, it is, because we're just filming someone's energy field. We're not influencing them in any way. We're not changing them in any way. So if we take someone's picture every day for a month, we will see the same pattern. We may see a cold coming into their field, but they have a unique pattern unless it's changed. we do recommend using third-party software. Camtasia, for example, allows you to capture the live video. So if you're wanting to record a video session of someone and you're having a healing session, all these things can very easily be done. But as you can see, we mostly are looking before and after. Just as a little aside, that gentleman was part of a study we did using another device, very similar to the one I mentioned earlier from Valerie Hunt, where we're actually measuring the chakras. Each one of these panes is a live 3D graphic of a chakra, and they link to the sensors, which you can see down his body here. Yeah? That's Kimberly on the machinery. We had to do this study in the jungle. You can't be any mobile phone, any machine of any kind near that machine. It's so sensitive. It's actually a seismograph, and we're measuring the chakras with a seismograph. But of course, it's important because it allows, for example, in this study, you see, look, the brow chakra. I just showed you his brow chakra. And then now look, he's just... This is the first time, really, that we've had a number of different devices from around the world which can be brought together and examine new medicine for all its types. And just to be clear, this is what we're showing. Healy will be standing there. Whatever healing technique you're doing, there's a couple of healers have come in, and we often see this white light appear when healers, especially working with their hands. And it's as if the healee is taking from the healer what they need. It's not like the healer's projecting on a certain color. And that's why I like the randomness of this technology that we're all working with. It's kind of left field, and that's exactly what healing is all about. A couple of end slides. First one is showing a possessed child. We travel around the world a lot, and this was in Bali. Cultures have different degrees of acceptance of this kind of thing, and it seems that cultures that have a wider acceptance of it, it's more prevalent, it's stamped into the sort of community matrix somehow. But interestingly, I don't know whether you can see that's a face there. This is a boy in a mortuary. So his body was lying dead on the stainless steel table, but we were filming him flying around the room. So, and the reason, I mean, he died in an accident. So, there was a lot of shock. He wasn't, and this research was quite well known. It was done in Greece. They were kind of guiding him into the light, but there's a lot of pictures where he appeared. Now it's not just my technology which shows entities and such forth. This is an image taken by a dear friend of mine called Jack Stuckey, and there's a number of these machines around called the bioluminator. And what they do is they create torsion. They're a torsion generator. I was speaking about torsion earlier. And this lady, you can see, this is before the machine is switched on, okay? And this is after the machine is switched on. So can you see there's an African-American woman in her face? Okay, so what's happening there is that she, as I understand it, had had a heart transplant from an African-American woman, and this particular imaging technique is able to capture that organs being. In other words, there's a lot of things we don't know about yet, and we're all just beginning to understand it, and it's important that we keep pushing and keep exploring.
What about blood transfusion? Because if there is...
Yeah, well, I mean, anything's possible. Anything's possible. The way I look at it is that we have already, billions of bacteria in our digestive system. This is a mob. They have their own mind. We say we have a gut feeling. We ain't having a gut feeling. That's a telepathic connection between the bacteria and us, and they're saying, get out of the way of that speeding car, or otherwise we're all gone. You know, there's a mob going on already, and we're just helping navigate the mob. There's another system using some kind of filters which allows us to see fully, ghosts. That's a ghost. In other words, modern medicine, by shutting the door on holism, allows hospitals to become what I consider very, very dangerous places. Yeah, because they may be sterilizing their instruments, but they have no idea of what's going on in the environment. And sadly, what happens in a lot of small hospitals is when a lady gives birth and the child is being cleaned and weighed, that is when entities jump in. Like a hermit crab seeing an empty shell on the beach. So the telltale signs will be they start craving tomato and chocolates. There are all kinds of things, but this is going on unchecked worldwide because of the divorce in medicine. And we need to talk sense so that we can all bring the best of our worlds together. I just want to show you one last slide because I think it's important. It's about the science. These two books, especially Life Force, The Scientific Basis, you'll read, it goes on to say, Breakthrough Physics of Energy Medicine, Healing, Qi, and Quantum Consciousness, which is the title of this conference. So I really would recommend, if you haven't got Claude Swanson's books yet, the first book is more about the 5 parapsychological things I mentioned, remote viewing and so forth. This one is specifically about the field that we're working with. And my dear friend James Oshman just yesterday told me that he's brought out a second edition of Energy Medicine, which has totally been rewritten. It's got apparently 600 images in it. I highly recommend, obviously many of you may have read the first edition, but this second edition is now update of, our field, the science in our field. So those 2 books I recommend you guys read. And then when someone tries to question you or call you out about something, you'll at least know the science about our field. Okay, thank you.